Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Craig from OneFix. I'm joined by John Clark from Solution Shared.
Hi.
And we're going to run through some bits and pieces about SharePoint, what it is, why you should use it, and yeah, a little bit more information about SharePoint. So I'm just going to fire up the slides. They're just playing silly with me, so give me 2 seconds. Here we go. Right. Okay, so real quick bit of housekeeping before we get into the meat of the content. So questions are welcomed. You'll find a chat box on the right hand side of the screen. So please do ask any questions as we go along. We're going to make this a fairly interactive session actually, because this kind of SharePoint does so much and is so vast that I'd like to fire your questions at John. I'll also essentially I've got some questions here that I'd like to know the answers to that I'll also fire at John. So we'll certainly learn some bits and pieces. I expect we'll probably end up lasting about 45 minutes, give or take. So from a time planning perspective, we should certainly be done before 2. Once we're finished up, if you have to drop out early or you want to share this with anybody else, you'll get a replay link through approximately 24 hours after we've started, so around tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So for those of you who don't know OneFix, we are specialists in providing IT support for businesses. So our typical customers, they range between companies with sort of 10 to 150 staff. Our average is around about a 30-seat client. And we normally manage the entirety of the IT infrastructure, the help desk and the sourcing of equipment. However, we are also able to work with in-house IT teams to add specialist skills that may or may not exist within the company, such as SharePoint migrations, Office 365 migrations, those kind of projects. The way we work with our clients is we save them money and stress by reducing unexpected downtime, helping them manage their IT budgets and planning, and keeping their IT environment secure. So presenting today, you got myself, so that's Craig from OneFix. We've also got John, who's the Director of Solution Shared. John, do you want to give us a quick run through about Solution Shared and the sort of stuff you do?
Yes, yeah. So we're primarily, to be honest, a Microsoft Dynamics CRM consultancy, but we do a bit of SharePoint work as well, and I have a long history of SharePoint in the past. I first bumped into SharePoint, probably SharePoint version 2003, so that's quite a while ago.
Wow.
Our clients are pretty much the same size as OneFix's.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. I learned today when I was doing a little bit more background SharePoint research, actually, it's been around since 2001. So it's knocking on a bit now, nearly 20 years.
I missed the first version.
There you go. So agenda today, we're going to run through essentially what is SharePoint. So we're going to run through and talk about what it is and what you can do with it. We're going to talk about what you can do with it. Why would you want to use it? So what are the reasons why you might want to use it rather than another solution? And then we'll get into the real meat of it. We'll have a kind of a live demo and a play around. I think there's a lot more to, there's so much you can do. We'll give you a really quick overview, and then I think it's the case that if you have specific things you'd like to know how to do, if it's simple, fire us a question. If it's more complicated, we can talk afterwards. And then Q&A with John. So we'll kind of run through any questions you've got, any questions I've got, and we'll discuss through that. So what is SharePoint? SharePoint is basically a web-based collaboration platform. It's primarily used for document management and for storage, but as John said, it's been around for a long time, so it's highly configurable. And whereas it might have started out in the very early days as being a kind of a basic collaboration platform, now you can do so much more with it. So you can use it for, these are just some examples. You can build an intranet website with it, and that's quite a common use case for SharePoint. You could do data capture, so you could build an internal data capture for, say, an HR onboarding form. Project management and scheduling, if you've got Microsoft project, you can link in with SharePoint, and obviously Outlook and the 365 tools will link in, so you can use it as a kind of a project management portal. Information storage, so not just documents. So John showed me a good example of this the other day, that you can gather up lots and lots of information into things like lists and data lists, and so they don't have to be documents that you store in SharePoint. So you can use it kind of as a capture and a collaboration point. There are hundreds of millions of users worldwide that have access to SharePoint via their Office 365 subscriptions. Now, how many of those people are using it? That's the question. There's a lot of people that probably have access to SharePoint and don't know what it is or have no idea how to use it or what it is. In terms of the Office 365 SKUs or the product codes that actually have SharePoint included, and this is a bit more complicated because Microsoft have just gone through a renaming process. So I've got the new names and the old names for you. So hopefully you'll know what you're on. But if you've got Microsoft Business Basic, which is what used to be called Office 365 Business Essentials, you have SharePoint. Likewise, if you have Business Standard, which was Business Premium before, you have SharePoint. If you have the Office 365 Enterprise plans, E1, E3, and E5, you have SharePoint. And if you have M365, actually the Business Premium, you'll also have SharePoint included. So those are really common Microsoft SKUs that many people have. Unless you're kind of running email only on Office 365, you've probably got SharePoint included in your plan. If you do have an email only plan, you can buy SharePoint as a standalone. I can't remember what the price is. John was saying to me a bit earlier on, we thought it was around about £2.50 a month. So certainly not expensive. So if it's something that you don't have at the moment and you want it, you can bolt it on, not expensive. So what can you do with SharePoint? Well, one thing you can do, and this is a common use case that we get asked for, and we're getting asked more and more for this actually, is that you can use SharePoint to replace your file server. So when you have an on-premises file server, traditional stack of folders that are shared with people through different drive letters, that's quite a good case for actually looking and seeing whether that can be replaced with SharePoint. Now, it doesn't suit everybody, so it does need a bit of thought, and it needs to be kind of on a case-by-case basis. But on here, you can see on this screenshot, it's that I've taken my particular folder and management share. I've shared that with SharePoint, and I've got some folders there. So essentially, you can start to migrate essentially in-house documents and put them up to the cloud and use them on SharePoint. You can create a collaboration area for your clients or your suppliers. Again, this is a screenshot from one of our live SharePoint sites. We have a marketing project running, a company called Wingman. And for them, we have created a SharePoint site. And on that site, we've shared a load of key documents and case studies and information. We've got some information in a news section. Again, it's a really basic use case for us on this. But again, this is what I'll show you when we go through creating a site. But this is the kind of thing that actually, out of the box, you can spin this kind of thing up in 5 or 10 minutes and have it ready to go. So it's for that kind of collaboration, it's really quick and straightforward. You can use SharePoint from within Teams. Now, this is a really key use for SharePoint, and actually, again, a lot of people won't realize that this is in place or that it's SharePoint behind the scenes that's powering this. But if you're using Teams for your kind of collaboration and communication, you'll see on every single Teams channel and every single Teams group, essentially, you'll have a Files tab, and that Files tab, which I've circled on the image here, when we go to the next screen, this is exactly what it looks like. So behind the Files tab is a SharePoint library. So every single channel has a SharePoint library. You can hit the sync button and bring that back to your computer using the sync tool, so you have a local copy. But every single channel has its own files area. And that's all linked to a Teams group and SharePoint group. So behind the scenes, when we look at SharePoint, again, you'll find that you may already be a member of a load of SharePoint sites and groups that you didn't know you were a member of because you're actually using Teams and you're in Teams groups. So, John, that was a really quick overview, but have I missed anything important there, or do you think that's covered the key things?
I guess the key things, because of SharePoint's history, it's effectively like a big box of Lego. It was built, it can do lots and lots of fancy things, but what most people use it for is putting documents in. I think for our size of businesses, I think documents, possibly using lists, you can use that to almost build a bit of a business application in SharePoint. Those are probably the main things. I guess the key other thing is you can get to it from anywhere. It's up in the cloud. It's on your desktop, your laptop, your phone, your tablet. Ideal when you're working from home.
Good point. Very good point. And I guess on that basis, then that means that you can use that on a collaboration basis with people essentially anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. They don't need to be within the company. They can be anywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you know, our team, we're all working from our home offices, and we haven't had to change anything because all our documentation is sat inside SharePoint.
Fantastic. So that, I guess that kind of leads into why you'd want to use it. And these are a few things that I've thought through and kind of tried to work out, well, why would you want to use SharePoint? Well, to me, the first point is the most obvious one. I mean, if you're already paying for it, it kind of makes sense to use it. You're not going to spend any more money. You've already got the tool there. You might as well make use of it. There are enterprise security and document controls built in. So because Teams is kind of because SharePoint has come down from, as John was saying, 2001, 2003, early days of big enterprise computing. The product's really been built from the ground up from a security and enterprise standpoint. So the nice things that they've made, like easy to use and easy to enable, behind the scenes of that, there's some pretty deep document controls and processes in place. So actually, it's just a good tool to do the job. One key thing, actually, and this is something again, the reason why we've driven more SharePoint adoption within our own business actually is that you have the ability for document collaboration. So for people who are familiar with things like Google Docs, for a long time where that was web-based, you could just co-collaborate on documents, share them, and everybody could work on them, and you could see who was working on which bits at which time. And Microsoft were trying to catch up with that, and they kind of got there with the online Office sort of products, but it was really difficult to get people to just use the browser-based products because people like the desktop product. But once you put your documents into SharePoint, or if you save a document to a SharePoint or a OneDrive library and you share it with other people, you can do real-time collaboration now with the newest packages. So we were using this internally the other day, and I can see on my screen exactly what columns and cells my colleagues working on in Excel whilst I'm working on the same document. So that's a really powerful use case, I think. It's probably key to point out here, as I put in bold, that and this may have changed, but certainly the last time I checked, which was about 3 or 4 months ago, you could not do this with the box products. You had ability to, you can still save to SharePoint, you can still do certain things, but a lot of the real-time collaboration and the cloud functionality is only on the products from Microsoft that you get delivered through a 365 cloud subscription. So if you've bought the box products, you're potentially missing out on that cloud ability. And if you have bought box products, I would strongly advise that in the future you plan to move those to a 365 subscription, because the box products, again, they'll no longer exist in a few years' time. It's something that Microsoft are trying to get away from. They want everybody on that software as a service model. So collaboration is key. You've got document controls, and when John and I were talking about SharePoint last week and we were running through this, we were looking at this, and there's document controls such as check-in and check-out. So that's really traditional kind of old school document management, but there's certainly a use case there if you've got things like legal documents, HR processes, things that you don't just want everybody collaborating or editing on. Even, you'd have to give them permission, but if you wanted a tighter control of that, then you can have a document check-in and check-out process. And as we discussed with the kind of file server, you can reduce the costs by essentially getting rid of that file server that's sat in the corner, move the documents into SharePoint, put it up onto the cloud, get rid of the on-premises server. That's going to certainly save you some money. You have a single pane of glass to find things. So this screenshot here is kind of, I believe they call it the SharePoint Hub, but it's essentially kind of a function that Microsoft added in, I guess, 6 months or a year ago, to try and make SharePoint a bit more accessible, because it was always a little bit techy and it was always hidden in the background. But now on Office 365, if you click on the dots in the corner, the sort of 9 dots, and go to SharePoint, you should land up at this screen, and this is the SharePoint Hub. And this will show you kind of the frequent sites that where things are being updated. You'll see if people are using news, you'll see news at the top. So this is kind of almost like a portal to your access of what you have in SharePoint. But the thing I find most useful here is actually the fact that you have the search box at the top, and that search will search across everything that you have access to permissions-wise within SharePoint. So I've done an example search for Sarah. Sarah's my wife, co-director, and just really quick example of the search that's pulled up there. So it's pulled actually up Sarah's card, so it's got her information, the about information that comes out of Office 365. It's pulled in a schedule, so if she has stuff in her calendar, we'd see that blocked out with things. It's also pulled through some documents. So it's pulled me in some documents there that have got information. And you'll find when you search on here, you can search for example, if something that you search for matches a SharePoint site title, you'll see the link to the SharePoint site, or if it matches a document, you'll have the document. So it's a super duper powerful search. I think it's probably the trump card of SharePoint compared to kind of using a traditional file server. It's the fact that you can search for something and it just appears super quick. It's so fast to find metadata and document data. And again, I'll pass to John in a second and he'll probably know the technical ins and outs of this, but SharePoint obviously appears to kind of index those documents and data, and not just Microsoft Office documents. It seems to pull in data from things like PDFs and a bit like your Windows search does. So it does mean you can just find things from documents that are saved in SharePoint very easily. So on that note, John, have I anything else that you would cover there as to why you'd want to use SharePoint?
I'll touch on the search thing. What it does is it searches all of the documents inside SharePoint, not just the title, but the body content. Mm-hmm. And they've got readers, so they can actually read pretty much most document types, not just the things from Microsoft, so inside PDFs and everything.
Okay.
They actually there was a big search company they bought years ago, and they stuck that into the plumbing of SharePoint. But it also searches across the other things you have access to in Office 365. So it'll search across the email server. That's why it brings up all your calendar, your contacts.
Right.
Brings all that in together. It's a great way if you've sucked all your stuff up from your file share into SharePoint. It's a great way of finding those old documents that you wrote 5 years ago, but you've no idea where they are. It's really powerful.
Right, okay. So it was the ones I can never find.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's very good.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll jump back into the presentation again to bring that back to screen. And actually, that's perfect timing because it does take us to the demo. So I'm going to share my screen a second, which will take me just one moment. Here we go. What I will do, because I know that the system does tend to compress things a little bit and add a few artifacts on there. I'm going to blow this up a little bit bigger as well, just to make it nice and clear, so that hopefully all the text is clear. There we go, 150%. That's massive, right? So, as I say, this is the screen that you will see. If you're using Office 365, the first thing to do, click on your dots at the top and jump up into SharePoint. So click your SharePoint link and click. This is what will load. And I say what we see here, internally, we don't really use the news functionality on SharePoint because we're a very small team. We don't have much exciting internal news that we couldn't just shout around the office. But if you're in a slightly larger corporate, or actually if you have SharePoint access to other corporate sites, then news from those will pull into here. So you'll kind of have this kind of top area of headlines and information. Then you have these frequent sites, and this is where you've got either the most frequent sites you access, or where there's documents that are changing and information that references you. So again, I'm probably the primary user of SharePoint internally at the moment for my own benefit of saving things and collaboration. So most of the headshots down here are me because it's me saving documents and me editing them. You can see there one of my colleagues, Tom's, done some bits and pieces on an org chart recently. But again, once you have lots of information and data up there, you'll see lots more changes and information coming through here. So to give you an example of what a site looks like, if I click into this one here, which is a group site. So this is the one that I grabbed a screenshot for a little bit earlier on. This is for a marketing project. So what I've done with this site is I've essentially spun it up and built it, and I've put some data in here. So I've shared with 5 people. Up top here, you can see, if I click in there, you can see who I've shared it with. So these guys here are all our outsourced people. These are internal staff. And what I've done is I've used this as like a document area. So I've given them some access to some case studies, some logos, key stuff that they're going to need to be able to do what they need to do. And here we can see under activity, this is where things have happened. So again, this is where I've uploaded some data. I've edited some data exports. So from this kind of page, you can see once you've got an active site, under activity, you'll start to see loads of stuff going on in terms of document changes and information. So you can track the key things that are happening and what's going on. And this stuff all kind of appears as standard. Excuse me. I've added in the comments area because, again, I wanted an ability if we wanted to have a chat or a kind of a comment section, we can do that. And that's one of the things with SharePoint is that we can customize these pages. So what we'll do in a second, I'll build a brand new site and I'll show you exactly how that works. So what I'll do, I'll go back to my hub page. Now there are literally about 10 or 15 different ways that you can build a new SharePoint site and get to it. I'm going to do this through this hub area. It doesn't give you so many options. It doesn't give you so much control, but actually if you're getting started and you just want to build a page to collaborate on things, this is probably the easiest way to do it. So from the hub, I'm going to click create site. And I'm going to get two options here. So I'm going to have an option for a team site or a communication site. Now, if you're following somebody else's guide online and it says you need to create a different type of site, then you'll need to go into the cog up the top into the SharePoint settings and create a new site that way, and you'll have a lot more options. But here, this is where they've essentially Microsoft have kind of dumbed it down and made it nice and easy, but actually it makes it straightforward, and this is what we want. So we've got two sites we can choose from here. We have a team site or a communication site. And essentially the team site, as it says, is for teams and communications and collaboration. Don't confuse it with Microsoft Teams. Doesn't mean the same thing, although a team site essentially, I guess, is the bit that drops behind Microsoft Teams, but a team site is for groups of people. Communication site is more, as it says there, I wouldn't say necessarily beautiful content, but publishing dynamic, beautiful content to people in your organization to keep them informed. So if you want to create that kind of, I guess, intranet page, John, would that be what you'd say with a communication site?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you can use it to build up an intranet with whatever you like on it.
So we're going to start. I think we'll just put together a team site because that's going to give you the same example that I've got on screen. So what it will do here is it will ask us to give the site a name. So we'll just let's keep it straightforward. We'll call it test site. It's going to check and make sure you haven't already named something that already, and it's going to check it creates, because it's a group, it creates a group email address. So it's actually created, so you go test site at onefix.com, it checks that that's available as well. By the way, I should say, if you don't see the ability to create a site, you need to, again, speak to your Office 365 administrator and make sure that you've got permissions to do this in SharePoint. So there are different admin permissions and levels. Your 365 administrator will have this. There's a role for SharePoint administrator, and if you've been assigned that, you'll be able to do that. If you haven't, you may well not be able to create a site. So if you can't see this, then obviously come back to the recording of the webinar. You can work through this, but you might need to speak to your administrator just to get permission to do this first off. So once we put a site name in, it tells us what the site address is going to be. And actually, we can't actually change the site address. That just pops in. What we're going to do here, we've got the description of the site. So SharePoint site for now. We have privacy, and there's two settings of standards: private and public. Now, public doesn't mean public in, I guess, the traditional sense that everybody in the world has access. That's not the case. As it says here, it's actually anybody in the organization. So your communication site, if you were making a site to tell people, if you wanted to say an HR portal that actually told people the latest news, gave them some documents, you could do that as a communication site, and you would make that maybe public to everybody in the organization because it's key information. Let's make this one private, and we can invite people to the group. So with private, it means that we have to actually choose who gets access to see this site or to collaborate in it. And we have a default language with a huge choice of options. I'm going to keep it on English because I don't speak the others. Okay, then, so you can see already it's created the start of our group. So it's called it test site. It gives it essentially an icon that's made up of the letters of the site. And we can add some owners. So we have two options here, owners and members. John, could you kind of give us a quick clarification of the difference between owners and members?
So owners have the ability to customize the site. So
Okay.
when you spin up the site, you'll have a document library, as they call it. Something that an owner would be allowed to do would be add additional document libraries, change what's shown on the home page for the site,
Mm-hmm.
change the structure behind it. Members, it's all about adding data.
Brilliant. Okay. So let's say for this one, I don't think I'm going to add an additional owner. What I'll do is I will add Sarah as a member. So you can start to type here and it will search your Office 365 directory if you go by name, or you can type a full email address. I don't know what happens here, John, at this stage if we try and add someone who isn't actually a member of the company. Do you think it would let me do that, or is that something we would need to do later if we wanted to invite external people in?
It'll depend on your default sharing settings.
Mm-hmm.
If you are set up to share externally, you should be able to add someone here as well.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try and add you as an example, and we'll see. I can't remember what our settings are, so this might be a car crash. Solutions share.co.uk. You have to start the full email address, and then once it appears as a box, you can click into it.
It's found me.
It's found you.
Probably because you added me to something else once before.
We'll see. Okay, so there we go. So that's answered the question. So with this one, we obviously have a policy that we can't share with people externally. So I'll take you back out. Let's finish. Here we go. Right, so that was super quick. It's created our site, and as standard, it kind of just looks a bit like your terminology, John. It's a bit like a box of Lego. We've got lots of stuff and doesn't really do anything at the moment, I guess. So so a standard on these this particular type of site, it will create for us this news section. And when I was on that first hub page, you'll remember we saw news there. Anything we add as news here will publish back to the news there for people who have rights to see that. It puts in these quick links, which I think really just quick links that tell you how to use SharePoint rather than anything that's going to be useful for your users. It creates your document library, again, with nothing in it at the moment. And you can drag and drop to that. And I think that's something that's probably new in the last few years, John. I think you certainly never used to be able to drag and drop to those, did you? So.
It's been around for a wee while, but yeah, it was a great addition when it turned up, yes.
I think it was one of the confusing things at one point in time that people just couldn't really necessarily work out how to add things into SharePoint. So you can drag and drop files straight into there and create folders. If I shrink the screen back down a bit, you'd have a few more buttons and options here, but it's as you can see, it's responsive. So as I've blown the screen up bigger, everything's kind of moved to fill the space. So again, that's one good thing with SharePoint. You can access from something like a tablet, and it will resize and refit the screen to fit what you're viewing it on. I've got some activity. So the only activity we've really got is that I've created the site. And that's about it. So we've got a kind of a section here where it says, you can add a list, you can upload a document. It gives you a few pointers and hints as to what you can do. So I guess one of the things that you want to look at first off, again, it gives you a prompt in the corner as well, also that you can link it up to Microsoft Teams. I'm going to close that for now. Just again, that's fine. And down this side here, we've got some sections as well. So we have conversations, we've got documents, we have notebook, pages, side contents, recycle bin. Recycle bin is actually quite useful because that's an area where once you start to use the documents and the files, once you get people who might delete things, you'll find them in the recycle bin. Does that also hold post content, John, as well? If people delete things like news or lists and things, or is it just for files? Do you know?
It will hold most things, yes. And even it sits in the recycle bin for a period of time. And then actually it vanishes out into, there's a secondary behind the scenes recycle bin that admins can get to.
Excellent.
It will eventually vanish, but
fine. And as an aside on that, actually a word to the wise is that Microsoft's terms and conditions do state that they don't really have any responsibility to back up your data. So we would always advise a 365 backup package that would back up things like SharePoint and Office 365, Teams, the email and everything. So off topic, but that's a key point to mention, I think. So now we've got our basic page. What we want to do here is probably say customize it slightly. So we've got two things here we can do. We've got new and we've got edit. So Edit will edit the page we're on. We'll add new sections, John, or is it completely new areas of the site?
It's completely new areas, though. Yeah, you could add, because your current page is really sat in a page library, so you could add another page to sit alongside it. Things like a list and document library are really adding another section. Yes.
Okay. So if we want to change how this looks, we need to go up to edit. So I'm going to hit edit now. And you can see at the moment now, suddenly everything's got like pluses, and as I move the mouse over things, they start to highlight. And if you find the right section, you can get these kind of pluses in the middle to add bits and pieces of content in sections. So let's see, what can we do? Let's plus into there. Let's add a new web part in here. I'll give you an example of the kind of things that you can add into the page. So they give you this featured section, which is kind of the things that you may well want to add. Highlighted content. It's all a bit dull actually, but there's when you get into the A to Z section here, you'll find that there's a whole load of kind of some useful stuff, some really weird stuff that you can add into a SharePoint page. Some of the things that I quite like is you can bring in, for example, if you've got, let's say you're doing a marketing page and you're looking at your website, you can bring in your Google Analytics, which is pretty useful. If you use Jira as a ticketing and like enterprise communication tool, you can bring Jira stuff in. But you've got all these other things, these standard kind of, I guess, Lego blocks. A group calendar. You've got a list properties. Let's see what we should drop in here. Let's drop in we've got stream YouTube. So yeah, again, if you've got a YouTube video you want to feature, you can bring that in. What should we drop in here, John? Let's put in people. Okay. We can add some profiles. I don't know. Let's say that'll be for that. Let's just click out. We can click into other sections here. We can edit what's displayed. So if we highlight any section, we get this black box at the side or grey box, and we can choose to edit the part. We can move it around, duplicate it, delete it. Editing it, depending on what kind of part it is, depends what you can choose. So for the activity, we can choose to show 9 pieces of activity. So you can start to go through and customize these bits. Same with the document library. I think the edit on that will give us a little bit of, essentially, if we've got more than one library, if we've created multiple document libraries and areas, we can choose which one gets displayed on that particular web part, so on the homepage, and we can choose whether it fits the number of items we've got, whether we just want to show about 5, about 15, about 30, command bar as well. So we can start to customize all this, and we can drag and drop these things. So if we take the people profiles, we should be able to, if my machine wants to play ball, here we go. We can drag them up above the news. There we go. And actually, do you know what? We don't want the news. Let's get rid of that. And let's get rid of the quick links. That's boring. Okay, so that's fine. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to republish. And you need to hit republish to make that change take effect. And there you go. So our page is now changed. We've now got a couple of people profile at the top. We've got documents. And you can add in logos. You can add in links to web pages. You can embed content. So you can start to make this into much more of a kind of a useful resource rather than what it comes with out the box. If we go into the document library, let's just go see all, just to make this full screen. This is kind of the bit where you can put files and data. So as and when you're starting to look at things like file server replacements, you can bring your data up into here. And I guess one thing here to mention is when you're doing that, you don't necessarily need to worry about what the site looks like, because if you're just going to use it and synchronize it to the machine, and you're not actually going to have people necessarily using the SharePoint site to access the data, then kind of doesn't really matter if the site's almost looks like a default site if you've got your document library and your information in there. So it's all about use cases and how you want to lay that out and what you want to do. And on here, we can go to new, so we can start to create folders. We can actually create new Office documents, and we can put in web links as well. We can upload from a traditional kind of menu, or we can say, as John said, drag and drop in. once you kind of start to create a folder, let's create one now. It starts to behave a little bit like you'd expect from Windows Explorer. You can click into folders and essentially view documents, move documents about. There's a few caveats initially, I guess, to be aware of, and this is, again, I think I'll let John talk on this in a second in terms of whether there's anything else that I miss here, but certainly from an IT perspective, one of the things we've hit before and a big issue has been that there are some, it can get a bit technical, and there can be limitations around how deep you can have folders, and if you're going to take kind of an existing file server where you've got, great long folder lengths, you might have sort of 200 characters of folder structure, and you're just going to drop that into SharePoint, you need to be prepared for the fact it will probably break, because there are limitations around things like how long the web URL can be. And when you have a folder, if we click into this one, for example, you'll see at the top here, the actual URL of my browser's got longer, and each folder we create, this gets longer and longer. So you will have potentially folders in Windows that are okay in Windows, but are not okay in SharePoint. And this is why I think from our perspective anyway, with the SharePoint migration of moving data to the cloud, it's not as simple as just creating a library and dragging and dropping all your stuff there. There's a bit of thought involved. There's a bit of planning. We have undertaken it internally from the perspective that a lot of our old stuff that sits on the server, we'll keep it sitting on the server for now. We're not actually that worried, but actually stuff that we want to collaborate on, we're starting afresh, and we're building up groups and SharePoint libraries and areas to work on those different projects and different files. So we're ending up kind of building these repositories as we go and adding new data and documents there, and just keeping the old stuff on the legacy server in its legacy kind of filing system. And give it a year, we'll probably move the rest of the stuff that we don't need, and we can ditch the server. But it's different ways to do it, different ways to approach it. But that's certainly a caveat, I would say. Anything you'd add there, John?
Yeah, I've actually just checked. So they've increased the limit. So online, you can, the entire path, including the file name, can be up to 400 characters.
Okay, that's good.
But if you're coming from a traditional file server where you've got folders within folders within folders and then long file names, you can easily eat up 400 characters. There are also certain characters that you can use in a file server that won't work in a website URL path. So that when you're migrating up, you need to usually use a tool to go and clean those up beforehand.
Right. So once we've kind of created this area, so we've got our site, we've put some documents in, we've made it look how we want, we might want to share this with some more people. So again, there seem to be about 50 different ways to do things in SharePoint. Initially, if you click on here on the members, you can add more members, but you will find that these will be potentially colleagues. So if you've got other internal people you want to add, you can just start to type them. Ben, for example, and I can add him in. He'll probably get an email now telling him that I've added him to test site, and he'll probably email me in a minute and say, what are you doing? What's going on here? And from here, I can choose essentially just whether he's a member, whether he's an owner, or whether we take him away. We don't have much control here as to, other than kind of, can they get in and do things, or do they own it, or do we not want them there at all? If we want to start adding other people, one of the things it does say here, we can go to Outlook, and this does work. If you click Go to Outlook, this will actually take you to Outlook web access, so it'll be Outlook in the browser, and you can add in external contacts, again, as long as you're allowed to share externally. And that will work, and it will invite those people. So the other way to do it, and John, you might have to talk me through this, is it on site permissions?
Are you looking for the advanced one?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, advanced one at the bottom. Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
So it now jumps into what I would call old-fashioned SharePoint. This is kind of how it used to look before they made it, before they gave it the Office 365 prettiness kind of update. But in here, you can click into these groups as to add people to these different groups and control what they can do. So members can edit, admins have full control, visitors are read only, so you can start to add people into your visitors. So if you have people that literally only need to come in and view, just read things, then they can do it that way. One really useful thing, and again, this is a handy little thing here, is to check permissions. So what can happen with SharePoint when you start to get lots of people in there is you end up with a situation where somebody gets in contact and they say, for some reason, they can't view a document or they can't access something or they're getting an error. So with check permissions, you click onto here, you would type their email address, or if you've created more groups, you can type the group. But again, in this basic use case scenario, it will be type their email address and you can check what they have access to. It's Sarah who's been added as an owner, essentially. She should have access to everything. And it will tell us that she can edit through the members group. If we take someone who's not in there at all, I don't think we added Tom, it will tell us that Tom has no permission. So if Tom came and said, I can't, you've sent me a link to this SharePoint site and I can't get on, we could check permissions, make sure Tom's in the group, and actually, no, he's not. So that's a really basic kind of permissions run through. Let's back out to where we were. And you'll see now I've added Ben, our members here has gone up to 3 members. So that's some really, really simplistic kind of creating a basic test site. You can also click onto here, and I think you can change the, not there, you can change the group icon somewhere because I've done it and I can't remember where you do it. Do you know off the top of your head, John? Or?
If you go, it's in the site settings. So if you go under there, take site information.
Okay.
And scroll to the bottom.
Maybe we'll change
there. You'll actually change it there as well now. Cool. Yeah, they're exposing some of the behind the scenes settings in this thing at the side.
That's it. So a lot of things, a lot of SharePoint things are quite straightforward in terms of the way they pop out and doing the basics, but it's doing the more complicated stuff is when you go up to the cog and you'll find these bits here, and from here you can start to delve back into the back end, and I guess it can get pretty scary pretty quickly from that perspective, because it starts to look, it offers you a lot of options and buttons and things that you can press. Yeah. But essentially, as long as you've got, say, your organization has external sharing enabled, and actually most of them do, I think, as standard. I think we've actually locked ours down from a kind of more of a security perspective. But if you've got external sharing enabled, you can start to invite people to this. This could essentially become like an extranet site for your particular project. And you can spin up as many as you want, John, can you? Is there a particular limit? There must be a limit somewhere, I guess. But
there is a limit, but it'll be a very big limit. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of sites and items.
So there's no reason you wouldn't create one of these for each project or each major customer you're working with, or?
Yeah, I mean, we've done it ourselves and done it for clients where you can set up a site for a client or for a project. You can then save that site as a template. So every time you want to create a new one of those sites, the same, you just make it from the template. So yeah, that works really well.
And the very last thing I was just going to cover here with this live demo is I've clicked on the conversations link from our sort of our SharePoint site there whilst we were talking, and it's you'll see it's taken me into Outlook, and actually we have a test site here, 3 members in the group, send an email. Because we were creating this as a collaboration or a team site group, it gets an email address, and essentially you can then have a separate set of emails that you ping back and forth, and somewhere down here on the side of there we go, under my groups right at the bottom here, you'll see we have some different SharePoint groups here, so you can actually almost have like a separate email inbox for that group. And I'm pretty sure as standard that's not able to receive externally unless you enable it, but that's a pretty straightforward setting to turn on to then be able to receive those emails in, so you can again send from that and collaborate externally in the same way you would with an Office 365 email address. And it doesn't require any extra licensing. Again, when you create the SharePoint team site, it creates that for you. I guess the only problem or the only downside when you create lots of these sites, it can start to get quite messy with putting you into tons and tons and tons of groups. So that's again why in the back end you can go and create a site and you can tell it not to actually attach an email address to it. But that's kind of outside the scope of this very straightforward kind of tutorial. So I guess that's the key things I wanted to show in terms of creating a new kind of SharePoint site. Anything today, John, that you think I should delve into or that we need to cover? Or
I was just going to mention, obviously, you can set this up to use internally, but also externally. So you could share things with clients, partners, etc. If you're going to do that, it's best to sit down and do a bit of planning to come up with a proper structure. Because what you really want to do is you want to set the security so that sites for a particular partner or client, for example, can only be accessed by them. So it's really about planning a structure that helps maintain the security so you don't share the wrong stuff to the wrong people by mistake.
Okay, that sounds like a sensible bit of advice. Have you seen that happen in real life then?
Yeah, I bump into people that have just started with one site, one document library, added thousands of folders, and then shared a folder to one client, a folder to another one, and it becomes like the Wild West. It's just no one has any idea what's going on.
Okay, well, that's useful to know. So I guess let me turn my screen share off for a second. There we go, we're back. So I guess from that perspective, then it's one of those things that if you're planning to do that and you're planning to share with lots of people, then as you say, you're almost better to go kind of wide and just you're better to have more SharePoint document libraries or per project or per customer than you are to try and kind of have this one massive, like your traditional file server. You're better off not to have that kind of one big P drive that shares folders with different people. You're better off to actually break down into lots of individual areas or drives and share.
Absolutely. If you go back to the old filing cabinet analogy, you maybe want to have a filing cabinet per client if you're sharing externally, and a drawer in the cabinet for maybe different document libraries, different types of file.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Again, if anybody's got any particular questions, pop them into the chat now, and I can ask John. I've got one here that actually came up from a client I was talking to the other day, who he already has a document management system. So he's using, I don't know if you've ever come across it, a product called InView, and he was saying, well, essentially, why would you choose a document management system like a traditional document management system over SharePoint or vice versa? So I don't know if there's a good answer for that, John, but
I'm sure. I mean, there's lots of those document management systems around. They do a great job. Some are better than others. Mm-hmm. But if you're very much moving into the Microsoft ecosystem with Office 365, you've got SharePoint there already. It integrates with everything else inside Office 365. The level of integration is increasing now that Microsoft are putting a lot of effort around Teams. Mm-hmm. If you go down the route of doing Dynamics CRM, it integrates with that as well. So it's just part of the system.
It's a bit like that "why wouldn't you" argument, isn't it? I suppose if you're starting from scratch, then why wouldn't you use it?
And if you're already paying, for now that they've changed, let's call it Business Premium, the old name for your Office 365 plan, you've already got it.
No, makes a lot of sense. We've had a question come in from Luke asking: is there a maximum document, maximum size to document, so individually or as a total, that you can put in SharePoint? File size or numbers.
So in SharePoint itself, maximum file size has now gone up to 100 gig
per file.
Wow. I know, it's crazy. In OneDrive, it's less, but I believe it's going to be increased. In terms of overall storage, it's a terabyte plus some extra amount per user, and I can't remember what the extra amount is. But in reality, you end up, if you've got 20 users, you've got way over a terabyte. If you really need extra storage, it's also very cheap.
Okay. And you just buy that in bundles of per terabyte, I guess, or similar?
Yeah, do you know what? I've never actually had to buy it for someone. I would imagine it'll be in bundles of maybe a 100 gig or something like that.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting question, actually, because I know, again, this is going back a few years when we first played around with SharePoint. There were some weird kind of quirks around the storage size between like you say, OneDrive personal areas, SharePoint areas. So there were, people were kind of hacking about to try and replicate their file server by putting it into one person's account and sharing it back and all this kind of stuff. So it seems to me that Microsoft kind of realized that's the case and have made that easier, essentially, so that the storage is less of a problem than it used to be.
Yeah, originally you got a terabyte in your OneDrive and a lot less in SharePoint. And then eventually they realized, wait a minute, that's just crazy. So you start off with a terabyte in both.
Great. Actually, before we've got another question before we go to that one, that segues into something actually that I should have mentioned earlier on, is that actually, again, with 365 now, you have OneDrive and SharePoint. Essentially both kind of now running on the same technology. So years ago, OneDrive was a separate thing. Now it all runs off the back of SharePoint, really. And one of the common questions we also get asked is, when should I use one and when should I use the other? So, John, when would you use OneDrive and when would you use SharePoint?
So really, OneDrive is, I guess, the cloud replacement for your My Documents folder.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely it's the place to put all your documents. You can sync it to your local machine or machines.
Mm-hmm.
The sync tool now works an awful lot better than it used to. Yeah, and then you've got your own personal documents everywhere you want to go.
Okay.
And then use SharePoint for that more centralized filing.
Gotcha. Okay. Another question: do the external users that you invite to SharePoint have to be 365 users? So do they need Office 365 licensing themselves?
No. They basically get a free pass.
Okay. So they would just have to log in with an email address and, I guess, create a password or some sort of login, do they?
Yes. So it depends what email address they use, but yeah, essentially they just need to log in. You send them an invite and they respond, but they're effectively all free users.
Right. Okay. And can you make a SharePoint site then that's completely public, that's basically just open to the web like you would with a website, or does it always have to be behind a login?
It's always behind a login. You can share individual things anonymously, but
Okay.
they need to have the link to go to.
Okay, so a bit like when you share a file from Dropbox or something and you get that sharing link that you send to somebody and they have access to it or they can read it or whatever. It's the same thing.
I mean, SharePoint itself used to do intranet sites, and there was a limited capability in SharePoint Online, but they've taken that away now.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay, well, I don't think we've got any more questions, and I think we've certainly used up more than our share of the time. So I will very quickly go through a wrap up. Let me just bring our presentation back to the screen one last time. So that was our Q&A. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for questions, and thanks John for being such a good support with answering those on the fly without any prep at all. I would say for any assistance on this in terms of migration, we're certainly able to help you with plans to migrate data to SharePoint, for 365 licensing, for general support. So that's our bag. We can help with that sort of things. As you can tell, I am not the SharePoint expert, but John certainly is. So for anything kind of SharePoint or Microsoft Dynamics or any of those kind of complicated workflowy type things that you can do in 365, John is certainly better placed for that than I ever would be. So we've got John's email address on there, johnclark@solutionshare.co.uk, and his website. Thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, John, for giving up your time today to come and do this with me. And hopefully people have found it useful. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers then. Bye.